Imagine a world where your investments are safeguarded from hidden dangers.
That sounds incredible. How does this all work?
It all stems from the Investment Company Act of 1940, a significant piece of legislation that regulates investment funds in the United States.
This act is a cornerstone of financial regulation, fundamentally shaping the investment landscape as we know it today.
So, what led to the creation of this act?
Well, it was a tumultuous time in the stock market. After the mutual fund was introduced in 1924, there was a rush of investor interest. But everything came crashing down in the Wall Street crash of 1929.
Exactly. The resulting Great Depression prompted Congress to take action, leading to the Securities Act of 1933 and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934.
Interesting. So, how did the Investment Company Act evolve from that?
In the mid-1930s, Congress asked the SEC to investigate the mutual fund industry. This culminated in the investment trust study, which took years to finalize.
It's fascinating how the original draft of the law aimed to grant more power to the SEC, but in the end, it was a compromise.
Did it change much over time?
Aside from some amendments for additional investor protections in the 1970s, it has remained largely the same. But there's more to come in this story.
What exactly does the Investment Company Act aim to accomplish?
Its stated purpose is to eliminate conditions that adversely affect both the national public interest and investors' interests.
It achieves this by regulating conflicts of interest and enforcing strict disclosure requirements for investment companies.
That sounds like a powerful protection for investors.
It is, but there are limitations as well. The SEC doesn't supervise an investment company's actual investment decisions, which opens the door to questions about accountability.
So, how do they ensure firms are keeping their financial health transparent?
The Act mandates that they publicly disclose vital financial information, but there still seems to be a gray area regarding specific operations.
Are all investment companies subject to this act?
Not quite. The Act has exemptions, notably for hedge funds and certain investment structures.
Recently, there was a significant discussion regarding special purpose acquisition companies, or SPACs, and whether they fall under this regulation.
Really? What's the controversy there?
In October 2021, a joint statement from over 60 law firms claimed SPACs are regulated under the Act, especially if they fail to acquire a business within a set time frame.
And this is where things get complex, as we see ongoing debates about how broadly the government can regulate emerging investment structures.
So, what was the rationale behind Congress enacting a federal law for these companies?
They argued that the interstate activities and wide geographic distribution of investors made effective state regulation nearly impossible.
This led to a unified federal approach, using the federal resources to oversee a rapidly growing multi-trillion-dollar investment industry.
That makes sense. Does this mean the act has a long-lasting impact on today's investment world?
Absolutely. But the question remains, is it enough to keep up with innovations like digital currencies and emerging financial technologies?
What types of investment companies are regulated under this act?
The Act classifies investment companies into three categories: face amount certificate companies, unit investment trusts, and management companies, with mutual funds being the most recognized.
Each type has specific characteristics that determine how they operate and are regulated, which is essential for safeguarding investors.
What's the distinction between these types? I'm a bit confused.
In simple terms, management companies are the most traditional, while face amount certificate companies deal with more specialized products. But the complexity continues.
Are there specific provisions that stand out in these classifications?
Yes, Sections 1 to 5 create critical definitions, while Section 6 gives the SEC significant discretion regarding exemptions.
This provision is fascinating because it allows regulatory flexibility, such as exempting venture capital firms back in the 1970s.
What about registration? Is it a complicated process?
Well, firms must initially file a notification with Form N8A and then follow up with forms specific to their fund type. It's bureaucratic for sure.
And remember, even the SEC took action against a cryptocurrency hedge fund for violating the Act, illustrating its ongoing relevance.
So, is the filing process the final step for investment companies?
Not quite. While registration is vital, ongoing compliance is equally critical.
Each investment company must adhere to strict guidelines to maintain operations, which guarantees transparency for investors. But it's a constant struggle to balance regulation with innovation.
It sounds like there's so much to navigate. What do you think the future holds for legislation?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? With new investment models emerging, how will regulations adapt? Listeners, if you have insights or predictions, we encourage you to share them in the comments.
Absolutely. The conversation continues as we look towards a potential evolution of these regulations in response to an ever-changing financial landscape.